So, this guy died last week, and it has me confronting some very difficult questions. Just a few months ago, I did this video on him, which is called When Self Help Turns Deadly, the story of James Arthur Ray. If you've never heard of James Arthur Ray, he had been doing self help seminars for a while, but his big break came in this documentary called The Secret, which was that really famous documentary that came out in the 2000s about the law of attraction. After The Secret, he got super popular. He was a regular guest on shows like Oprah Winfrey and Larry King. But as the intensity of his influence grew, so did the intensity of his teachings. What started as simple motivational seminars eventually started becoming these really extreme retreats that he started calling spiritual warrior training. By 2009, he had a reputation for pushing people to their absolute limits at his spiritual warrior retreats in Sedona, Arizona. There's a lot that goes into it. If you want the full story, you can watch my YouTube video. But essentially, one of the things that happened at these retreats was he packed them into this makeshift sweat lodge and told them that it was part of their spiritual journey. He had them in there for hours. He said that it was a journey they needed to go through to face their fears. People were passing out, people were begging to leave. He was encouraging them to stay, he was pushing them to stay, and telling them that they needed to stick it out so that they could really learn what it meant to face their fears. Tragically, at the end of this exercise, James Shore, Liz Newman, and Kirby Brown lost their lives in the sweat lodge. The families of the victims took him to court and he was formally charged with manslaughter. The families were saying that he was directly responsible for their deaths because of a variety of things. How the sweat lodge was makeshift, there was no ventilation, he wasn't really trained in this, and also for pushing them to stay. And James Arthur Ray and his lawyers, they argued that the participants knew exactly what they were getting into, that they had signed waivers, and that it was just a really tragic accident. At the end of the trial, he was convicted. However, it was only for negligent homicide, which was a much lesser charge, and he was sentenced to only 2 years in prison, and from that, he only served 20 months. When he got out of prison, he decided that the best thing to do would be to go back to doing exactly what he was doing before and become a motivational speaker, a coach, and do seminars and write books. And he actually ended up taking the experience that he went through, especially being in prison, and rebranding himself to essentially say that he was now in an even better place than he was before to be able to help people through their problems. As you can see, he really leaned into the tragedy as a way to make money for himself. From his homepage, jamesray.com, you can see this YouTube thumbnail that is pretty much right front and center on his website. The top left picture is the actual sweat lodge itself with caution tape. It's him in his prison jumpsuit, and it says that he's calling himself the most controversial man in personal development. And he mentions the tragic accident multiple times in his website and really was using that to make more money for himself. Which brings us to now. And apparently, last week, very unexpectedly, he died at the age of 67. I found out about it because someone commented about it on the video I made on YouTube. And when I first saw the news, the first thing I thought was good. And I've been struggling with that for the past week because I've always considered myself to be a very kind, compassionate, empathetic person. I started my channel to begin with because I wanted to help people and use my story to hopefully make it so that people wouldn't fall into these traps and these awful people. And he is the awful people that I warn people about. I think that people like him do so much harm to people that are already in a vulnerable position to begin with. And they capitalize on that. And they are vultures trying to sell people a quick fix or an extreme program, just to make themselves more money. And so it feels really terrible to say that I think the world is a better place without him in it. But he's also very terrible. And I've followed him for a long time. I've known of his story for a long time. And not only did he do many terrible things along the way, but he also never seemed to have any remorse for it. He, in fact, decided to use it for even more gain for himself. His rhetoric was angry, his website was angry. He did not seem sorry. And I looked to see if one of the victims' family members had any comment about this, and they did. And the sister of one of the victims, she said basically the same thing that I'm saying, which is that she empathized with his family because she knows exactly what it's like to lose someone unexpectedly, because she lost her sister unexpectedly because of him. But that she thinks that her sister would be happy to know that he's not out there hurting anybody else. And that's exactly how I feel. I feel like the world is safer, that people are safer, now that he's not spreading his rhetoric. I am still wrestling with whether or not it is okay to feel this way, and maybe I'll change my mind, but this is the first time I've run into this in my reporting on my channel, that somebody that I've done a deep dive on has died, that I think is a terrible person. So I'm interested to know how other people feel about things like this, and how you kind of wrestle with that as well.